From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. Last month, a few hours after the Supreme Court of the United States overturned its own 1973 ruling that had granted American women the right to terminate a pregnancy, about 70 Polk County residents gathered on the lawn of the county courthouse, which is a pretty impressive turnout for 4 p.m. on a workday with no advertising or advance notice. Among them was a retired nurse who, like just about everybody else in the crowd, wasn't going to let the day pass without saying something. And what she said is as good an introduction for this week's guest as anything I could come up with. So let's hear it.
A native of Polk County. I grew up here, left for my adult life, and came back. Since 1973, all I've ever done is help pregnant women. I don't know how many of you are as old as I am, but we fought for these things in the 60s. I saw women who had illegal abortions, or women who had purposely been pushed down steps so they would have an abortion by their mate, almost die. I have seen some die from trying to do abortions on themselves so they wouldn't have to have the baby. It is not my right to tell somebody else what they can do with their body. And I'll be damned if a white Supreme Court is going to tell me what to do with my body. It is my right. Please know that most women in America who get abortions are married, and they have made this decision with their partner. They are not teenagers. They are not
sluts.
Yeah, sluts. They are married women who have made the decision with their partner. So don't let these Republicans tell you, or these evangelicals tell you, that only the sluts get abortions, or that people are doing it to control the population, or people are doing it so they can go out and have free sex. Sit with somebody who has to make that decision. We're going to have women die from ectopic pregnancies. We're going to have women die because they're going to get infections because they, what we call, have a spontaneous abortion, but they don't expel all the fetal tissue. Our nation is in trouble, people. And I hope every one of you will go out and tell people to please wake up. I don't care whether they call us woke or not. We need to wake this nation up. They're tearing it down piece by piece, as you said. And this will really tear it down. I can't talk anymore.
My guest is someone with an even more personal perspective on the ramifications of letting states decide whether women should be allowed to have abortions. Like more than 70,000 other women each year in the United States, Kelly turned to in vitro fertilization, or IVF, to have a child. 2 of them, actually, because she wasn't able to have them without the assistance of modern medical science. Because the science isn't perfect, IVF usually involves the fertilization of several eggs, and for every embryo that's successfully implanted, others have to be discarded. And because it involves the destruction of embryos, even if they're only hours old, IVF could soon be illegal in many states. I talked with Kelly about that scenario at her home a few days ago. Kelly Hanlon, Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate your time.
Let's start off, just talk about yourself a little bit. Where do you come from? How did you get here?
So it's an interesting story, I guess. I grew up in West Virginia and another area of Appalachia. So I've basically lived in Appalachia, or have lived in Appalachia my entire life. Grew up in West Virginia along the Ohio River Valley in a little town called Vienna, right across the river from Marietta, Ohio. And went to undergrad and graduate school in my home state of West Virginia at Marshall University. Go Herd. My husband and I both did undergrad and graduate work at Marshall University. And after graduating from graduate school, we went to Columbus, Ohio, and started our life there, our professional careers. I had a whole career in medical and pharmaceutical sales, and he is a safety, occupational safety and health professional. And so we both started our careers there. We were married in Columbus, Ohio, and interestingly, in the oldest Episcopal church in Central Ohio. So that was kind of interesting and historical. And we had our children in Central Ohio and started our life there. And then in the winter of 2013, we had the historical record snowfall in Central Ohio, and ice storm upon ice storm, and we had decided that that we were ready for a change. Our youngest was getting ready to start kindergarten, and we had some friends in Polk County who were developing this very neighborhood that we're sitting in right now, and said, "Hey, we're developing this property. You guys want to help us, get it going?" And our kids are mirror images of one another. Our sons are now going into 8th grade. Our daughters are going into 11th grade. And we just decided that it would be a fun change and an interesting adventure. And we're super happy that we're here. Yeah.
When we first met last year during a little bit of problems with the school board, you said you weren't a particularly political person.
Up until that point, I really hadn't paid much attention to local politics. I mean, Mike Ashworth is our financial advisor, so I knew he was appointed to the school board. And honestly, when you're in the throes of parenting, the daily grind takes precedent over, and the time constraints takes precedent, or it did for me, over local politics. I mean, I would listen to NPR in my morning routine, and but never really paid much attention to what was going on. And honestly, how we were connected through the Delta surge and the mask debate that ensued. Unfortunately, part of the global COVID pandemic became political, and it was like a collision course. And I felt like if I wanted to be a good parent, I had to make a stand and try my best to protect my kids and other kids in the community in terms of trying to keep this classroom scene as safe as possible. And so I was tossed into that arena. I had always felt that the most primal job as a parent is to care for the young, and I felt a driving need to try my best to keep all the kids in Polk County as safe as possible.
Do you think your place in the community has changed, or your role in the community has changed because you've stepped up to?
Yeah, I'm just a mom. I have a master's degree in leadership development, and I guess maybe I was relying upon some of the skills that I had gleaned from that education years ago, but it just kind of happened. I mean, I have a business in Henderson County, and Henderson County seems to be a handful of weeks ahead of us in terms of the school year, and in terms of, at that time, the COVID process, or the decision-making process in terms of how the school systems were going to handle COVID safety protocol. So, yeah, and I have a, as I mentioned before, I had a career in dealing with where medical professionals were my clients, and so I have a natural respect for their profession, and I felt like the decisions should be made based on medical advice and recommendation rather than political positions, making political positions. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then last week, we had this Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is because you made a post to your friends on Facebook talking about your personal experience with creating a family. And I'm really curious about why you agreed to talk to me about that, because I think most people would consider that an intensely private thing.
It is.
But in my introduction, I laid out why we're talking. But did you ever foresee yourself talking about this issue in a public way?
Creating a family for some couples or individuals, it's not always cut and dry, in the movies and fantasy world. The princess marries the prince, and then they have little royal babies, and everything is fairy tale, and everybody lives happily ever after. But in our circumstance, our path to creating a family was just paved with tons of heartache and lots of struggle. I had a series of ectopic pregnancies, which were really tragic. The first situation occurred, I think, in the fall of 2003.
Okay, I think we should probably get into the details. A lot of people may not understand what an ectopic pregnancy is.
Okay, so basically, when an ectopic pregnancy occurs, its definition is outside of a pregnancy that occurs outside of the uterus. So I had a tubal pregnancy where it was lodged in my right fallopian tube, which is probably more than you need to know, but at any rate, I had some dull pain and ended up in the emergency room thinking I had perhaps had an appendicitis. Well, in that age bracket, they immediately test you for pregnancy, and I had no idea. I was actually on an oral contraceptive that oral contraceptives aren't 100% effective always. And lo and behold, after a scan, they discovered that I had a pregnancy that was at 10 weeks gestation. So within 20 minutes of diagnosis, I was in an operating room having the pregnancy removed from my body. And when you go through something like that, it's just whirlwind. There's absolutely no time for discussion. I don't even think that my husband was there until after I was released from the operating room.
Right, because an ectopic pregnancy is not just a non-viable pregnancy for the child. It's also a huge threat to the mother, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there was no discussion. Like, you are bleeding internally. You need to have immediate treatment, or this could be fatal. It doesn't happen. Years ago, before medicine kind of caught up with reproductive health care, women would lose their lives to this, and in fact, sometimes women still do. It's terribly unfortunate, but. There was no, at that time in 2003, 2004, there was no pushback on a clinical or medical abortion, which is what these situations are coded as. I mean, when you get the explanation of benefits, weeks after it's processed through your insurance, it's coded abortion.
Right.
So, yeah.
So when it came time for you to plan a family, you ended up having to choose IVF.
Yeah. We ended up having a second ectopic pregnancy, and it was much. It wasn't as developed, and we weren't as far along in the process. And I actually knew I was pregnant, and then it was discovered based on hormone development or hormone. HGC levels weren't doubling as quickly as they should have, and so it was I was obviously, based on prior history, being monitored more closely, and so we found out, I think, at 6 or 7 weeks, and that pregnancy was treated with a chemotherapy drug called methotrexate, and so I was able to have a high dose of that administered, which leads to subsequent, just a handful of days of discomfort, lots of nausea, and just, in summary, it's just a lot of heartache and a lot of physical pain as well. But again, that was a clinically necessary procedure, and again, it is coded as an abortion, and so that is part of my medical history. It's part of my personal history, and it is what led us to land at Ohio Reproductive Medicine with some mad scientists who were just absolutely wonderful and enveloped us in their care and led us down the in vitro fertilization process.
And how many kids?
We have two. Yeah. We had in our first in vitro process, we had 2 embryos transferred, and one of which took when we have our beautiful daughter, Allie, who is 16. And then 3 years later, in the second process, we had an additional 2 from a separate procedure, 2 embryos transferred, and we have Rocco now, who will be 13 in a couple of weeks.
Well,
Yeah.
Congratulations on
Thank
navigating
you.
the moderns of science to give you a family.
Yeah, I'm still very connected to the group, the practice that helped us with this, and gratitude and the word thanks is just an understatement for their professionalism and how they helped us create the life that we have.
Well, this story, and the reason why you're on this podcast is because I don't think too many people think about these type of stories when they read about what the Supreme Court just did. All right, they think about irresponsible young mothers who don't use birth control and turn to abortion as their form of birth control.
Yeah, I kind of feel like over the last handful of years, unfortunately, the church and part of our political system have hijacked the word abortion, and it's a very devastating medical decision for anybody in any circumstance, and it really is. It's intensely private, and I guess we haven't done a good enough job explaining what it really is, or other groups have chosen to cherry pick certain situations that they personally believe are immoral, but when you boil it all down, it's as personal as, what kind of knee replacement you want to have, or, if you're gonna have, I don't know, any, like a certain kind of dental implant. It's personal. It really isn't for anybody else to weigh in on, and it needs to be guided by medical professionals who have a deep appreciation for safety and for all the implications that surround that choice.
Unfortunately, the debate seems to be between those who agree that it is a intensely personal decision and those who say, no, it's not, because we're talking about a potential human life here. And there's no way to bridge those two points of view, I think. And my understanding of Roe v. Wade back in 1973 was it was an attempt to come up with a compromise between those positions. And now the Supreme Court has said, no, if a state wants to get rid of that compromise and just go one way or the other to the extremes, they can. Now, North Carolina, abortions are still legal. You'd still have to drive a fair bit from Polk County to get one, right? But there's no imminent threat to take away the ability to do things like have an IVF procedure.
Not right now. I actually participated in a group forum last evening with Ohio Reproductive back in Columbus, Ohio, and embryologists and folks that are involved in vitro clinics are very aware of what's going on, especially in Ohio, because if legislation comes down, which it has come down in Ohio, in terms of a heartbeat bill, which it's not technically a heartbeat, it's electrical activity, and embryos have electrical activity at a handful of days. That's how their embryologists will grade them in terms of their viability, and that helps you make your decision as to how many embryos you're going to have transferred to your body for the likelihood of starting a baby or creating a baby. And anyway, when and if there is legislation that would come down as to what is quote unquote a life, then there may be legislation on that would prevent in vitro fertilization from actually even being able to be an option. They may ban that procedure in and of itself, and that's really, really very unfortunate and a huge step backwards.
Have you paid attention to the situation in North Carolina in the legislature?
Yeah, and it appears that that we're pretty safe right now. But this debate just keeps getting hotter and hotter, and it's really mind-boggling to me, based on our personal family history, that this is even being discussed.
Well, the thing that I find it's literally ironic, is that the anti-abortion movement, if you follow through what they ultimately want, which is a complete ban on the destruction of embryos, and it would prevent people like you from having a family, right?
Right. Yeah, and so the fight is intensely personal to me. The conversation is very triggering. It's not just me. I mean, there are tons of families out there who have had, like I said before, who their path to starting a family wasn't easy. It was another job. It was a full-time job to keep up with the medical regimen and staying on top of all the procedures. I mean, I was at Ohio Reproductive at 6 a.m. every other day for a whole cycle. I mean, you go get your blood drawn, and then you have an ultrasound to check the production of your follicles, because they're basically hyperstimulating and stuffing a whole year's worth of reproduction into a 4-week period. And so it's physically draining, and it's emotionally draining, and it's financially draining as well.
It's not cheap.
No,
Yeah.
It's not, and it's and it shouldn't ever be up for political discussion, and it's unfortunate. It's really, really very unfortunate. And I actually didn't have any interaction with protesters my first cycle in 2005, but in December of 2008, when we were in the throes of having Rocco, every IVF clinic is attached to a laboratory where embryos are stored, either for that particular cycle or cryopreserved for future use or potential use. And it's one of my 6 a.m. appointments. I had to cross a picket line of what I would assume were evangelical Christians who wanted to, quote unquote, have a weigh-in on what I would potentially do with my embryos. if they would be used or adopted or discarded, or, I was just a woman trying to have a baby who, and it was unfortunate.
So that kind of attitude could get translated into legislation in North Carolina.
Yeah.
If Republicans take back a veto-proof majority in the House and Senate.
It's important
this fall.
Yeah,
right?
and it's important, and that's one of the reasons I chose to speak with you, is because I think it's important for people to share their personal stories of what reproductive freedom looks like. And when you boil it all down, little girls in 4th and 5th and 6th grade are starting their menstrual cycles. That's what kicks off adolescence and puberty, for women. And I think we're woefully undereducated in terms of women's health in our society. And it's a huge part of a woman's life from age 10, 11 to age 55. That's a big chunk of time for a woman. And we're talking about medical procedures that you should be able to make, that you should be able to have if you choose, and to be able to make that decision with your doctor and not have your doctor be afraid that they're going to lose their license.
Of course, you can't predict what's going to happen in November with the vote. But in Polk County, we had a little protest against the Supreme Court decision on Friday. I counted 70 people there, and that was a protest that was organized within hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how to judge that, but it seems to me that getting 70 people during the working hours on a Friday afternoon to show up on the spur of the moment is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got larger crowds in places like Greenville and Asheville, but then they're big cities.
Absolutely.
So does that suggest that maybe even in places like Polk County, there's a lot of women who just are not going to let this happen?
I would hope so. There. I'll tell you what has been heartening to me is hearing younger kids that are in high school that are very engaged in this debate, and it was by surprise. Oftentimes you think teens are self-absorbed and into their own world of TikTok and their own social scene, but I have been very, very impressed with how some of the young gals have been engaged and staying on top of this. So that's heartening. And it inspires me to speak out and try to keep, healthcare as safe as possible for them.
Well, I can't think of anything else to ask you.
I hope I haven't bored you.
No, this is definitely not a boring podcast episode.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. This is great for our community, and I have always believed that education can solve a lot, and communication can solve a lot of problems. And I feel like, in this world of fast, unedited information, we're all bombarded with social media and nonstop news coverage, and so I think it's good to for forums like this to exist, and I appreciate your.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing again to share something, which is something that you aren't expected to have to share, right? But unless people like you do share, we can't have the discussion we need to have about this, right?
Yeah. And women's healthcare, and healthcare in general. We shouldn't have taboo topics. When things are kept hush-hush, sometimes bad things happen, and we shouldn't be ashamed to be who we are. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. And that's it for this week's show. If you got any suggestions for guests or feedback of any kind, you can always reach me at jamesh@folklore.com. Thanks for listening.